Almost 2 weeks have passed since Larian Studios released Patch 8 for Baldur's Gate 3's early access. I spent a good amount of time with it and took some notes along the way, so in today's video I'm going to talk about Patch 8 and give some in-depth feedback. The biggest addition to the game that came with this patch is of course the Bard class. Overall, the Bard feels pretty good, and it has a nice mix of supportive, offensive, and control type features and spells, but this class definitely leans a bit more on the support side of the spectrum. If you like classes that are designed to have synergies with other classes, then you can really benefit from having a Bard in your group. And of course, when it comes to the more non-combat role-playing type situations, there's no better class out there. The spell animations and sound effects with the instruments are great, and they really help the Bard feel and sound different from other casters. And I'm very happy that Larian has created specific animations for whatever instrument that you have equipped. The Bard is certainly not perfect though, nor would I expect it to be in its initial early access stages. And a few of the concerns that I have mainly revolve around Bardic inspiration and the reaction system, but I'll talk about that here in a minute. Let's get back to the instruments. With Patch 8, we now have the Perform ability that all Bards get, and also characters who take the Perform feat at level 4. And honestly, I think this is one of the coolest features in the game to date. What Perform does is it allows your character to play one of 3 songs with the instrument that they currently have equipped. If you have other characters that can also perform, choosing the same song with the same or different instruments will synergize all of the performers together. It's so much fun playing around with the different instruments and hearing the different variations. And Larian also made it so that if you perform near some NPCs, they'll walk over to you, and if you pass a performance check, they sometimes tip you with a little bit of gold. I think it could use some tweaking though as to which NPCs actually respond to it. You might have like 2 NPCs that hate each other that are now happily dancing next to each other. Sometimes it just doesn't really make sense. The Perform feature doesn't really seem to be designed to have any crazy powerful uses or anything like that, although it can be used before combat to group several NPCs together, which might need some tweaking, but overall it seems to be more so designed for just general game enjoyment and role-playing, and it's been an absolute blast being able to do this, especially after a long day of brutal battles. Because it's not crazy powerful, and more so for ambient enjoyment, one suggestion that I have for Larian is allowing the entertainment background that you can choose in character creation to also give the player the Perform ability. Right now, like I mentioned earlier, you can only get it by playing as a Bard or choosing the feat at level 4, and there actually might be an in-game way to do it as well, but I can't think of it right now. But I think allowing us to also get it by choosing the entertainment background, or maybe the entertainment background would give players the ability to perform with just one particular instrument, while Bards and the performance feat allow players to of course use all of the instruments. I think this would give way more players access to enjoying this really cool feature, even if it's a more limited access. And it would also allow more players to experience having multiple party members being able to play some songs together without needing to have multiple Bards in your group. I'd also love to have more songs in the game. Maybe perhaps we could even discover and learn more songs by finding their sheet music in treasure chests, or maybe even by talking to certain NPCs. I'm sure Larian has plans for some of this, but I wanted to bring it up anyways. Now let's get into some Bard criticism. Currently in early access, all Bards are given 3 Bardic inspiration regardless of your charisma modifier. Larian probably has their reasons for this, and perhaps there is a good explanation, but I can only speak on what I know and what I've experienced. And I have to say that having only 3 to give out with a level 4 Bard who has 18 or 20 charisma feels a little underwhelming. Bardic inspiration is one of the staples of the Bard class, and the majority of the time I feel like I don't have any to give out, especially as a player who doesn't always want to long rest after every single combat encounter. As of now, I'm leaning towards wishing that Larian went with the 5th edition rules here and based your Bardic inspiration on your Bard's charisma modifier. This would increase most Bards' Bardic inspiration by 1 or 2 for early access depending on how you work your charisma ability score. And while on the topic of Bardic inspiration, let's talk about one of its features that feels pretty useless to me in its current state. When Bardic Inspiration is cast on a party member, they can use it to add a 1d6 to an attack roll, an ability check, or a saving throw by toggling on their respective option. I think it works great for attack rolls and ability checks. I honestly have no problem with the current system for these two options, even though it's still different from 5th edition, because in 5th edition you can choose to use Bardic Inspiration after the initial roll has been made. In Baldur's Gate 3 you choose to toggle it on before the roll. But for the saving throw or Bardic defense option, I don't know if I would ever even consider using it with Larian's current reaction system. If you toggle the saving throw Bardic defense option on, the Bardic Inspiration will be used for that character's next saving throw. Once you toggle it on and end your turn, you have zero control over when it goes off. And why is this a problem? Well, here's an example. Let's say that you're fighting 10 goblins and an ogre. A bard gives you Bardic Inspiration and you toggle Bardic Defense on because you know the ogre can do a mighty attack that causes your character to become incapacitated if they fail a Constitution saving throw. So you toggle Bardic Defense on, end your turn, and then right away a weak little goblin that's earlier in the turn order than the ogre uses a rather laughable spell on you that causes you to do a saving throw. Well, say goodbye to your Bardic Inspiration, it's now gone and used up, and the ogre will annihilate you when it's the ogre's turn. Not only does this suck for the player who was given the Bardic Inspiration, but it also kind of sucks for the bard who gave out one of their very limited Bardic Inspiration die. If you play as a College of Valor bard, the defensive option for Bardic Inspiration, which is called Valiant Defense, gets even worse because Valiant Defense adds a 1d6 to your next saving throw or a +4 to your armor class for one attack. You would think that would be a buff to it because you now have more defensive capabilities and can now use it to help with a saving throw and an attack. But since these two options are not separated, you lose even more control over when it will go off. Imagine toggling Valiant Defense on and having the weakest enemy on the battlefield do a regular attack on you using up your inspiration die. Having to gamble with the actual use case of your very limited Bardic Inspiration is not a great use of it in my opinion, and as of now, the vast majority of the time you're much better off just using it for an attack roll or an ability check. Solutions to this, well, obviously many including myself have talked about the Stadia pop-up system, where a box pops up and asks the player if they want to do something when a trigger for a reaction takes place. I did like this type of system in Stadia, and I think it could be great in Baldur's Gate 3, but at the same time, I can also understand why Larian might not want this pop-up type system in their game. The current toggle on and off system does keep combat flowing better, and it keeps the overall game much more visually appealing as you don't see pop-up boxes popping up all the time. And like I said earlier, I think it works great for some things, such as using Bardic Inspiration for an attack roll. But unfortunately, it works really poorly for other things, such as attacks of opportunity, spells that are reaction spells, such as Hellish Rebuke, and I'm assuming we're going to get Shield at some point, and Bardic Defense. If Larian is committed to not doing a pop-up system, I hope that they can at least find a way to make better use and better sense out of some of the reaction features like Bardic Defense. One quick idea that I have, if Larian is committed to their current system, which we don't even know if they are, and this wouldn't solve the problem entirely, but perhaps when you toggle something like Bardic Defense on, you also then have to choose an enemy, or even multiple enemies if you so choose, that you're okay with the Bardic Inspiration being used on if one of those particular enemies attacks you. So if you're fighting a powerful spellcaster and there's also a bunch of weak adds in the combat encounter, you would toggle Bardic Defense on and then click on that enemy spellcaster, and the game would then only trigger Bardic Defense for that spellcaster. This is kind of similar to how cutting words works for College of Lore bards, and personally, I think it works fine for this particular feature despite it still being a bit of a nerf from 5th edition. And the last quick bard thing, at level 3 as a College of Lore bard, you currently do not get to choose your additional 3 skill proficiencies. It seems to be set in stone on giving you Arcana, Intimidation, and Sleight of Hand. I feel like this might not be finished yet, and that's why we currently cannot choose, but I do think, regardless, that we should have a choice here. It not only just makes sense College of Lore bard-wise, but if we don't get to choose the actual 3, then it can really screw up players who have already selected some or all of those skill proficiencies in character creation. Now I'm going to briefly touch upon visuals, audio, and game performance. With patch 8 came a noticeable improvement to the overall game's visuals. The gameplay cinematics are really starting to resemble what I would imagine is getting close to final form. It feels like you're watching a movie at times. This is by far already the best cinematic quality of any CRPG to date, and I think it's also going to raise the bar for all RPGs in general. Of course, there's still some random glitches and some broken scenes, and the lighting is off, especially in some of the Astarion scenes, but the general overall quality in what we can kind of expect now is starting to become very, very impressive. Patch 8 also brought with it new sustained facial animations for characters and dialogue, and we have some background acting that's going on with your companions. Overall, both are nice additions to the game to add to the immersion. Some of these particular cases are not perfect yet, but definitely on the right track. The audio improvements with patch 8 were very noticeable right away on the Nautiloid ship, and we have new sound occlusion and auditory attenuation. You can hear sounds coming from the left, right, the distance, and all of it is starting to sound really, really good. And while on the topic of audio, shout out to Borislav, or as everybody calls him, Bobby, the composer for Baldur's Gate 3 and also DOS 2, as Baldur's Gate 3's OST has done nothing but improve, improve, and improve. And there's so many songs now, and even some of the more ambient music that will surely become classics for RPGs. When Early Access first launched, I thought that the OST was alright, and I was a little bit worried about it, especially coming from DOS 2, which is such an amazing OST. But now, as of patch 8, in Baldur's Gate 3, it's becoming something truly special, and I can't wait to hear everything that comes with the full game. As far as game performance goes, I won't talk on this that long because everyone's PC is different and we're only in early access. But for me, patch 8 ran much better than patch 6 and 7. If you're having a hard time, make sure to try switching from Vulkan to DirectX or vice versa on the Larian launcher before you start up the game and get too upset, because sometimes that does fix things for people. Also keep in mind that true optimization is of course one of the later steps of a game's development, so if you're really worried about this, perhaps just wait until the official launch. Now let's talk a little bit about the user interface. Last patch, which was patch 7, there was a major revamp of the user interface, mostly with the goal of making things easier to find, but also easier to understand, especially for players who may not be as familiar with the rules and mechanics. Overall, I thought that patch 7 had really great ideas, and I did praise these ideas in my patch 7 review. However, a few weeks later, I started thinking to myself that some of these things don't really look and feel 100% right just yet. It really felt like an initial pass at a new UI, which it kind of actually was. With patch 8 though, the UI feels and looks noticeably better than in patch 7. Larian has changed a few things, but also kept most of the patch 7 ideas with a new and improved art and general functionality, and it's just made it so much better in my opinion. I think we're getting close, just like with the cinematics, to a point of where I feel like I'm going to be happy with its final form. One thing that I did notice though is that when you click on a spell, the animation begins. If you want to upcast that spell, if it's a spell that can be cast at level 1 or 2, if you want to upcast it to level 2, then it will redo the spell animation. And once you start getting quick with this, you have to do like a double animation if you want to cast a spell at level 2. So for example, I'm clicking on Healing Word right now, but I want to do it as a level 2 and I'm quick with it, so I immediately click on level 2, and I think all of this is represented well, but having to do the double animation and hearing the sound effect twice started to get quite annoying. And last thing for the user interface is that I've noticed that a lot of people have been asking during my live streams and also in the video comments if there could be a way that we could make something, at least some things, larger so they're easier to see. Now on to Swarm AI, which is a huge improvement for the game's overall combat. In select larger battles, the AI that is now in consecutive order in the order of turns will now take their turns at the same time, or at least very, very close to each other in terms of timing. The first battle that came to my mind, and probably several of your guys' minds as well, when this was announced, is battling the goblins at the entrance to the ruined temple of Saluna, or the Goblin Fortress. I honestly avoided this battle as much as I possibly could after doing it one time back in patch 1, as it took me like an hour and a half to 2 hours to complete that encounter. It was painfully long, and there's not really a ton of interesting enemies, and because of both of those factors, it became a real slog of a fight that most probably would not want to do in the game again. With patch 8, however, in this new swarm AI, it's drastically improved, so much that I don't think I'll have a problem doing this encounter on every single playthrough from here on out. Now, the name Swarm AI is a little deceiving here because many players seem to think that the enemy is going to swarm them out of control, effectively making combat harder. But this isn't how it works. Swarm AI only works for minor creatures such as goblins, and these minor creatures have to be in consecutive order in the order of turns. So basically you get the same outcome as before, it just happens in a much quicker time span. Also, I noticed that many of the minor creatures will move at the same exact time, especially the dash action, but their actual attacks are a little staggered, which I think is so we can better see what actually happens, because we don't want to miss, damage that our characters take. And also I noticed that when a minor creature has a spell to cast, sometimes those creatures are not even part of the swarm movement at all. They have their own separate turn, even if they're in consecutive order. It could probably use a little touching up, but definitely a huge time saver and a big plus for turn-based combat as a whole. Now, the AI themselves are definitely not perfect yet, and some of them still have this pause issue where they act like they're actual players who are thinking about their next move, but I think that's probably more of an obvious thing that Larian already knows needs to be improved, and they're working on it. Speaking of bugs, the launch of patch 8 was pretty rough. There were several game-breaking bugs that made it not really enjoyable to play for many, such as saves crashing the game, individually selecting food for a long rest causing the game to crash, and perhaps the most annoying was companions not following you. Larian did put out a hotfix about 4 days later, and it seemed to fix most of it and put the game in a playable state. Just be aware that as of July 16th, which is the last day that I played, it's not entirely fixed, as I still had some group select issues and following problems, but it wasn't nearly as bad as before the hotfix. And I almost forgot to talk about the update to character hairstyles, as we have a new hair shading model now where we can do different highlights and also add in some gray hair if you want your character to look a little bit more mature and aged. And as someone who doesn't really care about crazy hair colors when I'm playing games, I thought this was really cool. And when I started playing around with it, I was like, this is fantastic for a character creator. And considering that we're in early access and it's not even finished yet, seeing this was gave me a lot of hope for the official launch with all of the extra stuff that we'll have. Hopefully we'll be able to control a little bit of our body thickness when you're playing a class like the barbarian and stuff like that. But excellent update for the hairstyles, high quality. It's one of the best hairstyle model things that I've seen to date. One more thing that's patch 8 specifically related is the new digging mechanic, where if you come across buried treasure and you pass a passive ability check, you can then dig up that treasure as long as you have a shovel. I actually like this mechanic, and it does make exploration more fun, but I don't think I'm the only one that thinks that the chests that we're digging up are way too big and perhaps a little immersion breaking. It kind of looks a little on the silly side in my opinion, which is more DOS 2 like, which fits DOS 2, not necessarily Baldur's Gate 3. And that's it for my notable feedback for most of the major additions and updates that came with patch 8, but I'm not quite done with this video. Overall, it was a great patch, and this is definitely one of the bigger moments where I really start to see this game getting closer to its final boss form. To end the video though, I'm going to somewhat rapid fire off a few things that I'm hoping to see updated or added, but these things don't necessarily have to do with patch 8 specifically. Starting off with the camera. There's still a few areas where camera navigation is quite difficult, and I noticed it a lot in Grimforge. Some people on my channel have brought up the idea of having a command button that auto brings you to a different altitude. And personally, I think that could be a great idea, but maybe this feature should require that our characters have already discovered these areas on the different altitudes before we're able to auto jump to them, because I don't think it would be that fun to just go into every new area, hit the command for camera altitude or elevation change, and then all of the map secrets are revealed to us. But whatever Larian does, I think it still needs a little bit more work to make it less frustrating. Next improvement I'd like to see is the option to back out of a few of the ability checks once they have been initiated. For example, if you start a lockpick with the wrong character by accident, it's already too late and you're forced to go through with it at least one time with that character. You cannot back out of it. For non-dialogue ability checks, ones that are generally activated by the conscious choice of a character, such as lockpicking and disarming traps, I think you should be able to back out of the die roll screen. It doesn't really make sense that it would be too late to stop yourself from picking the lock, unless you've already rolled the die, of course. Right now it just feels a little frustrating. Next, I'd like to see a way to access the inventory of companions that are not currently in your party of 4. There's nothing more annoying than wanting to take Lae'zel's medium armor for your College of Valor Bard, but having to dismiss Astarion, ask Lae'zel to join, taking her armor, then dismissing Lae'zel, having to walk back to Astarion, and then asking Astarion to join you again. It seems like there's a lot of unnecessary steps here for an outcome that is the exact same. And the last 3 improvements, well, actually 4, are better controller support. And judging by my comments, there's a decent amount of people that are asking for this. More uses for items such as rope, and using rope as an example, it currently just feels like a completely pointless item in the game. Perhaps we could use rope to descend down ledges or maybe even tie up a few NPCs. I want Larian to get rid of the ability for wizards to learn divine spells, as divine spells are for divine casters. And the wizard having access to all these extra spells not only just doesn't make sense lore-wise, but it also takes away from the point of other classes. I'm of course hoping for a reworking of the reaction system, and whatever Larian does here, I just want it to make sense. Having zero control over some of your more costly reaction type features and spells is just not very good right now. I'm also hoping for a little bit of a redesign or improvement of the current in-game map. I kind of feel like it looks like a termite pit right now, and when you zoom in it gets really blurry and you can't really tell what's going on the map. And with such a beautiful RPG, I don't see why we can't also have, you know, a really nice map. And lastly, I'm hoping that Larian allows us to initiate a long rest with the camp supplies with a companion. I don't see why it has to be done by your custom character. And actually, since we're on the topic of food, one more. I noticed that some of the food that you pick up in the world, you actually have to put in your inventory, then right click to send it to camp, while other food, you can just right click on the food and send it right to camp. There's an extra step for some of the food. It's kind of just a little bit inconvenient and a waste of time having to do it for some and not the others. Hopefully all of them can be a little bit simpler to get them to camp, especially considering that food is 99% of the time only meant for camp for resting. And that'll be it for today's video. I'm sure I left out a few things here and there, but my God, we're already at 21 minutes, so I'm going to cut it off here. I think I got to all of the important stuff. Thank you guys so much for watching, and some of you guys will be watching this when I think I'll already be at 100,000 subscribers, so huge thank you. I'm eternally grateful to be able to do this as, you know, hopefully I can call it a career now, and I'm very excited for the future of the channel. Thanks to your guys' support. Catch you guys on the next one.